Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Spears. I'm the Executive Director of Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a Pro Bono Partnership before we get started on the website. But first, I just want to introduce our speakers today. Sarah Parker and Katie Bennett are with Holland & Knight. They're both technology attorneys and very excited to get their help. And we appreciate the support of both Sarah, Katie, and their firm Holland & Knight. So thank you. So Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta, in case you don't know about us already, we're a nonprofit too, and we provide free legal services to other nonprofits that serve low-income and disadvantaged individuals. We help with the organizations' business law needs by matching you with volunteer attorneys, volunteers like Katie and Sarah, who can help with your legal needs. We also have attorneys on staff who can help. If you're interested in applying for our services, you can go to our website, find more information. But basically, you need to be a 501c3 organization already. You need to be located in or serve the greater Atlanta area and serve low-income or disadvantaged individuals, be unable to afford legal services. And we've got some other things we look at. So you can fill out a request if you want to get more information about that. Our Learning Center, our resources are open to everyone and they're free. I really encourage you to check out our website for past webcasts as well as podcasts. We have a lot of articles on there. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a link for where you can sign up for our mailing list. So you'll get information about these things and about upcoming workshops that you can come to. And finally, this is legal advice. I'm sorry, not legal advice. It's legal information. So always check with an attorney for your specific legal needs. Katie and Sarah are welcoming questions today. I encourage you to type in your questions in the Q&A box, and I will be monitoring those throughout the presentation. So now I will turn it over to Sarah and Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for having us. And hi, everyone. I'm Katie, and I'm here with my colleague, Sarah. We're excited to talk to y'all today. So our agenda is we're just going to cover website terms of use, kind of the basics of those, the basics of privacy policies, copyright policies, and then a couple other considerations to keep in mind when y'all are setting up your websites. All right, so we're going to start with website terms of use. So what are website terms of use? They're essentially a binding contract between you, your nonprofit, and each individual that accesses your website. They're generally designed for posting on the website so that your visitors can read them and review them, and they contain provisions governing their access to and use of the website. You might be wondering why you need a website terms of use when you're setting up your website. And generally, they're used to minimize your liability to your users, and they include a lot of provisions aimed to protect your nonprofit, such as provisions that protect your intellectual property that is included or accessed through the site, or provisions that make sure that your visitors aren't using the website in a way that's harmful, such as adding infringing material, using the website for illegal purposes, or including viruses on the website. We would generally suggest that every person that has a website has some kind of terms of use to cover these provisions. Randy, if we could pop to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're just going to go over a few principles of the website terms of use to keep in mind when setting them up. So one of them is notice. We always want to make sure that the terms of use should clearly inform visitors about the services that you're providing, and also that the visitors need to agree to a terms of use before they access and use the website. If they don't agree to the terms of use, they really should not be accessing or using your website. The terms of use should also cover some permitted and prohibited uses of your website. So as I mentioned earlier, a good example is, the user can't use the website for an illegal purpose. They can't upload viruses to the website. They can't add in infringing material, which we'll cover a lot in the copyright policy slides, a few slides from now. Also, there should be some intellectual property provisions in that terms of use. So making it clear that you own the website as a nonprofit, all the content on the website is owned by you, and anything accessed and used by the visitor to your website is not their intellectual property, and they have no rights to that content. The terms of use should reference the privacy policy, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Should have a clear reference with a link to the privacy policy so that the users can understand how their data is being accessed and used by you. And then finally, every terms of use should have some kind of limitation on liability, limiting the nonprofit's liability, such as a standard limitation of liability provision or an indemnity provision. We can pop to the next slide. Awesome. So just some best practices to keep in mind when you're setting up terms of use. So although it's not required, it's usually a best practice to track user consent to online terms of use. Tracking consent allows you to provide proof and dispute that could arise in the future with any kind of visitor that your user consented to and is bound by the terms of use. Oftentimes, if cases come up on website terms of use that end up in court, a lot of them will hinge on whether or not the user consented to the terms of use. So it really is a good practice to keep track if possible. One of the few ways to do this, to keep track of consent, is to have a pop-up box pop up. I'm sure we've all seen those and gotten annoyed by those. But have a pop-up box pop up on the website saying, hey, here are our terms of use. Here's a link if you want to check it out, and that you consent when you're visiting our website. Some website builders like Wix, which I personally used before, have the ability to do that for you to help you track consent. Also, another best practice for website terms of use is to make sure that the link to your terms of use are clearly visible on your website. You'll often see this kind of at the bottom, and it says terms of use, and it's a link, and you can click in and your visitors can see those terms of use. And then finally, another good best practice for terms of use is including some kind of contact information in those terms of use, and to make sure that people are actually keeping track of who is contacting you and what their questions are. This comes up sometimes when a user tries to contact a website builder and they're not able to get in contact with them, and they have some kind of issue, or they're trying to report infringing material, and it could be an issue if no one's actually managing that contact information. Awesome. If we could pop to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah about privacy policies.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. So now we're going to talk about privacy policies. So when you think about a privacy policy, think personal information. So it's really dealing with personal information such as, the names of individuals, their email addresses, their physical addresses, and you can also get into kind of more sensitive personal data, right? Such as, credit card information or healthcare information. Obviously, that is going to depend on your specific nonprofit and what types of personal data that you are using and collecting for the purpose of the nonprofit. So kicking it off, let's talk about what is a privacy policy. So a privacy policy on your website is a policy that lets users to your website know how you as a nonprofit are collecting their personal information, how you're storing their information, how you're going to use their personal information, and how you will disclose it. So whether that's to third parties or whatnot. And so when you think about a privacy policy, the big things are notification and consent. So you are notifying the users how you are collecting, storing, using, processing their information, and then you're getting their consent to be able to do that with the information. So that's kind of the basic of what is a privacy policy. Why do we need a privacy policy as a nonprofit or any company? So privacy policies are required by a host of kind of international, national, and US state law. And so, for purposes of today's discussion, we're not going to really talk about international laws because we're pretty specific, right, to Atlanta and to Georgia for the purposes of this presentation. But you can still have some international, issues or concerns, right, depending on how you are soliciting, if you're soliciting to users right outside of the US to collect that information. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're just really going to focus on US and state law. Perfect. All right, so the key principles of the privacy policy. So one, you always want to have kind of an effective date on your privacy policy. So the date you put on the very top of the website, privacy policy, and says when that policy is implemented. And then as you change your privacy policy throughout kind of the life of your website, then every time you update that privacy policy, you'll put a new effective date on that. So it puts people on notice of how you are changing the policy. So as we talked about before, right, one of the key tenets is notice. So you are notifying the users to your website exactly what you are doing with their personal information. So kind of the basic tenet, right, is let's clearly inform visitors to the website about the types of personal information that we are getting from them and how we are collecting it, using it, and sharing it. Now, this is going to be very different, right, based on your nonprofit, right? So let's say you're setting up a website and the only thing that you are doing, right, is maybe you allow a function that allows someone to type in their email address and then you will send them periodic updates about, newsletters for your nonprofit. And so really it's just all you're soliciting is maybe their email address, their contact information, and getting their consent to say, hey, you're going to opt in to our website and our notification, and we're going to send you updates on fundraising activities for our nonprofit or things like that, right? So that would be kind of the when I think of kind of a nonprofit privacy policy, that's one of the basic kind of platforms or ways that you're going to be soliciting information. There's also, right, depending on how broad your website is and what you're doing with the information, you could be getting more information from that, right? You could be, let's say you're selling merchandise on the website. Or specific services. So let's say you're selling hats or t-shirts or coffee mugs that have your website, your nonprofit logo on them, right? Well, part of that, right, you're going to solicit financial information, credit card information. So there's kind of extra steps that you want to put in that privacy policy that will dictate, based on how sensitive the information that you're collecting, and make sure that people are on notice, right, that you are soliciting and obtaining that information, what you're going to do with that. You're going to disclose it to the credit card companies. You're going to use it to process their purchase of the merchandise, etc. So notice is kind of the fundamental notice and consent. So the second one is choice and consent. So we're going to also, in our privacy policy, we're going to tell visitors how we are using that information and get their consent to do so. So as Katie kind of touched on, in the website terms of use, if you've seen kind of cookie policies, right, you go to a website, whether it's a nonprofit website or not, just a basic website, and you'll see kind of maybe the cookie policy, and it'll say collect necessary cookies, or you can opt into marketing and all of those things. This is what those kind of things are getting at, is the consent. So it's each website, right, is soliciting information and saying, we would like to send you marketing materials, we would like to send you notifications of the fundraising activities we're doing, but you, user of our website, would need to opt in to be able to do that. Do you consent to opting in and us using your email address so that we can send you additional, fundraising activities or flyers or, things like that? So the choice and consent is basically the policy should always provide visitors with choices of how we're using their personal information and obtaining that consent to be able to do so. So the third tenet is just kind of consumer rights. So the policy should describe how users can exercise any personal information rights they have, such as requests to access, correct, or delete personal information that the site collects, or stop any sales of personal information to third parties. So if you think about, I think about with this, so it's the concept is similar in when you have an email, right? So let's say you subscribe to email updates, right? And you see it, you start getting inundated with emails from a website, whether it's a nonprofit website or not. You'll see that unsubscribe button, and that will allow you to opt out, right, of receiving kind of future communications. That's what this is getting at. So we're saying, hey, we're collecting this information, but if you decide at any point that you don't want us to send you this fundraising information, this flyer information, these updates on what our nonprofit's doing, then you have the right to opt out. And you can let us know by unsubscribing or whatever the process is through your website, right? So just making sure that the individual that you're collecting that information from, they have rights with respect to how you're using that data, and that they're able to say, I don't want you to use my email address anymore. I'd like to be deleted from your email distribution list, etc. So that's what that kind of consumer rights portion is. All right, and the fourth is security. So if you look, we've thought about for this one, but we didn't want to, take up too much time. But if you look at kind of a general privacy policy, right? Take Google or just any website, you'll see, the notice, the consent, request to delete rights, and then you'll see security. So security is kind of the fourth tenet, and that's really just the steps that the nonprofit has taken to protect your data, right? So they're saying, hey, we have an information security policy that we've put in place, and we have trained our staff, right, to understand that they need to keep, personal information, within certain databases, right? Or we encrypt data in transit and at rest, right? So whatever the policies that you all have to be able to protect that personal information that you're collecting and using, you want to put that in your privacy policy so that it puts users on notice of the security steps that you're taking when you are collecting and using their personal information. And the security policies, you'll see if you kind of go to, just type in any website, look at their privacy policies, you'll probably see it's maybe a sentence or two. These don't need to get, I say encryption of data in transit and at rest, and you can get very specific about what you're doing, but a lot of time you'll see kind of a broader, so that it gives the nonprofit flexibility to not kind of dig into the specifics of you're encrypting data in accordance with X policy, right? These encryption steps. I don't think that you all need to get that prescriptive about it, but you'll just see it's good to kind of take a look and see how others are handling it, and make sure that whatever you're doing, right, matches up to the actual security protections that you as a nonprofit are putting in place. So when you think about the privacy policy, it is specific to your organization, because each nonprofit is going to be collecting and using personal information in different ways. It could be as, basic as you just collect email addresses to keep, users of the website in the know. Or you could be selling, merchandise like we talked about, and you also are using that information to process the transactions, process their payments, etc. So each privacy policy is going to be unique to your nonprofit and how you all are collecting and using that information, and the security that you all have to be able to make sure that you are protecting that personal information. All right. Okay. So privacy policy best practices. So some things that we can we've talked about what the privacy policy is. We've talked about kind of the key tenets of the privacy policy. Let's talk about something actionable that we can do as nonprofits to make sure that we are having kind of privacy policy best practices. So things that we can do operationally, right? So we've got our privacy policy up, it complies with our organization. Now we're talking about operationally what we can do to make sure that we're complying with our privacy policy and we're being kind of good stewards of that personal information. So one thing to do, right, is tracking user consent to the privacy policy. We talked about that a little bit in the last slide, that you've seen maybe some organizations, they track cookies, right? So they have kind of the opt-in of you're opting in for the necessary cookies, or you're opting in for marketing purposes, et cetera. And you kind of click through and select, select or deselect how you want your information to be used. So that's one way that some websites, right, are doing that and tracking user consent to the privacy policy, to cookies tracking, things like that. So making sure that you've got some kind of mechanism in place to be able to make sure that people are, you know who's opting in, opting out, et cetera. So the next one is make sure the links to your privacy policy are clearly visible on the website. And so you'll see kind of a lot of websites at the very footer, right? It'll say, contact us, privacy policy, terms of use, get in touch with us, things like that. And it's always kind of at the very bottom of the website. And so a lot of nonprofits have just taken that approach where you just have it at the bottom of the website. It's clear and it's on every single page, regardless of what links you click on and where it's taking you within the website. That's probably truly the best practice. But I would say if you don't have that, then anytime that you're on, part of the website that is collecting information, make sure that the privacy policy link is clearly visible. Okay, the third thing is make sure the contact information you include in the privacy policy is accurate and tracked by someone in your organization. So if you say, hey, if you have any questions about this privacy policy or how we're collecting or using your data, please contact, our, chief organizational officer at, an insert email, right? Or legal at nonprofit.org. Right. So just make sure that when you're including your organization's contact information, just making sure that you're always making sure it's accurate and up to date, and that you're able to receive communications from website users if they have questions or suggestions about your privacy policy. Okay, and if there's any chance your website could be accessed or used by users in the EU, include a cookie consent notice. So you'll see, even if you're not operating, you're not soliciting, it's probably outside the scope of this presentation anyway, because most of us, right, we're local organizations, we're not actively soliciting to, website users or residents of the EU. But this is a good privacy policy best practice anyways, right, of cookie consent notice, like what we talked about with opting in and making sure that the cookies that are collecting that personal information, you're getting that consent, you're right, you're providing notice to users and getting their consent to use their personal information. And now I will turn it back over to Katie to talk about the copyright policy.
Awesome, thank you, Sarah. So we're going to talk a little bit about a copyright policy and kind of where that comes from. So copyright policies really are the result of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is a US copyright law that kind of deals with the protection of copyright materials online. So the DMCA provides a lot of restrictions and requirements that companies, all businesses, including nonprofits, need to follow when it comes to copyrights online. However, they do provide an opportunity for online service providers to shield themselves from liability from the actions of their visitors. So if a visitor goes on your website and posts infringing material, essentially the material of somebody else that's been copyrighted, there is a safe harbor under the DMCA for website owners to shield themselves from liability for that third party's action. So we typically include copyright policies, and this is why, most nonprofits should probably have a copyright policy, just to make sure that we can qualify for that safe harbor under the DMCA. And typically, a lot of this, typically copyright policies are either included as their own separate policy on a website, or they're included as part of the terms of use that I mentioned earlier. It's really kind of a preference Sometimes people like to include it in the terms of use because it's all in one place. Other times they like to make it clear that there's a copyright policy separate and apart from the terms of use. We could pop some, thank you. So just going to talk about some of the key requirements of the copyright policy. So the DMCA kind of outlines a few key principles that nonprofits need to keep in mind in order to qualify for that safe harbor. So the first is notice, and we've talked a lot about this in terms of the terms of use and as well as the privacy policy. So the copyright policy should really notify users that the policy provides for a termination right. So it gives you a termination right in certain circumstances if the visitor is posting online material. So if someone is using your website to repeatedly post infringing content over and over, you should have a termination right in that copyright policy and in the terms of use as well, to give you the right to terminate that user's access and prevent them from accessing the website again. Another key principle is prevention. So the copyright policy should really make it clear to visitors that they cannot interfere with certain technical measures that you use and other copyright owners use to identify or protect copyright works. So we're really kind of putting the visitors on notice that, hey, you can't post this infringing material. And if you do, you're either going to be terminated from the website, you won't be able to use it, or they could get in trouble with the original copyright notice. The copyright holder. Another key principle to keep in mind is that in order to qualify for that safe harbor under the DMCA, you must not receive any financial benefit directly attributable to any infringing activity of your website users. So if a website user is posting on your website with infringing material, you cannot receive financial benefit directly from that website user or because of that infringing activity. The next principle to keep in mind in order to qualify for that safe harbor is that you must expeditiously remove or disable access to any infringing material on your website when you receive notification of it or you're otherwise made aware. So the next point we'll talk about having a designated agent to kind of receive notice of copyright infringement. So when you are getting those notices of copyright infringement, you must expeditiously take action to remove that infringing material and disable access to the visitor that is posting that infringing material. And then finally, you must designate an agent to receive notice of copyright infringement claims from copyright owners. So those copyright infringement claims are also called DMCA takedown notices. So you'll get an official legal notice that no one likes to receive in the mail, but you'll get one of those and it says, hey, you've put some infringing material, it's my copyright, you got to take it down. So that's who the agent that you receive notice of the copyright infringement, you got to designate them and they'll receive those takedown notices. And then you also need to register that agent's name and contact information with the U.S. Copyright Office in order to qualify for that safe harbor. All right, and so the final slide here is we have some additional considerations just to think about when you're putting your website up. And they're a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but we wanted to make sure that y'all are aware of it when you're putting your websites together. And if you're engaging legal counsel in order to help you, they can certainly kind of help you with these particular considerations as well. So one of them is the ADA. So the Americans with Disabilities Act applies certain compliance requirements on websites. And specifically, it applies to all goods and services offered by public accommodations. And there's been a lot of different court interpretations what public accommodations means, and people have gone back and forth. But generally, the courts have upheld that the ADA applies to websites open to and intended for the general public. So they will most likely apply to your nonprofit website. The ADA requirements are very robust, and we unfortunately don't have a lot of time today to spend kind of running through all of them, but some of them, are pretty straightforward, such as including hyperlinks that have descriptive text, have all pages of your website should have skip navigation links, and then videos and transcripts and audio descriptions, of course, should all have subtitles. Pretty straightforward stuff. And unfortunately, this particular area of law is rife with lawsuits. So in 2019, I think there was almost 2,500 ADA lawsuits related to websites. So we really do suggest that, if you're posting on your website, you make sure that you're complying with these ADA requirements. And then finally, it may not apply to you, but in some cases it might. If your business is or wants to engage in any kind of e-commerce, whether or not you're profiting from the e-commerce, so if you're selling t-shirts online and the money from that t-shirts are flowing into the nonprofit to kind of help keep things going, you may be subject to additional laws and regulatory requirements because of such e-commerce. So an example of that is the payment card industry data security standards, which are pretty robust standards related to businesses that are accepting payment card information. And this is because when you accept payment card information, you're accessing a lot more personal information than you normally would when you just have a regular website. And as Sarah mentioned, we really want to make sure when we're collecting personal information on websites, we have a robust privacy policy and that we're also complying with relevant privacy law. So the PCI DSS, that payment card industry data security standards, is just kind of an extra layer of privacy compliance that you'll need to worry about when you are collecting credit card information based on e-commerce transactions. And so although, again, not the topic of the webcast in general, these other considerations are pretty important and are something to definitely think about when you are putting your website together overall. Awesome. So that concludes the kind of substantive portion, but we wanted to see if y'all had any questions for us. We're happy to answer them.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll be watching in the chat or the Q&A, wherever you want to put it for questions. So this is your chance, everyone. In the meantime, I will raise one question, which is, can y'all just speak a little bit to any additional considerations if you have children visiting your website?
Absolutely. Great question, Rachel. So there are specific, so when you think about kind of privacy concerns, right, you think about who's regulating, right? Is it at the state level or is it at the federal level? So for children, right, if your website is, and you're collecting information from children, right, or you're marketing your website to children, then there's additional kind of federal law that you would need to comply with. And it's one where there's specific, portions of the law, right, that you'd want to, it's called COPPA, right? So that's what that's kind of the name. And there's specific kind of provisions that you want to comply with. Is there anyone on this webcast who is soliciting to children or collecting kind of information from children? Because that's a really important thought, Rachel, in terms of making sure that based on the types of information you're collecting or the types of services that you're providing as a nonprofit, that you're making sure that there's a different regulatory landscape, right? Depending on if you, are, soliciting information from children. Anyone on this webcast?
You can type in the chat if you are. I don't see any. But I can add, I think we do have some resources on this on our in our Learning Center on COPPA. It's COPPA. Is that right, Sarah?
That's right. Yes.
Excellent. All right, I don't see any other questions. Oh, we do have a question for y'all. Should the privacy policy and copyright information be included in the employee handbook?
Great question. So this, so the privacy policy really is for your website, right? So when we talk about on this webcast, when we're talking about a privacy policy, we're talking about on your website when you have someone that's going to your website and you're getting information from them. There are still, right, if you have an employee handbook, right, you, or let's say a volunteer handbook, right, you're still soliciting personal information from your employees or your volunteers to be able to, you know, whether it's an employee, right, to be able to provide payroll to them, or whether it's a volunteer, right, to provide information to them. That's a different, there's privacy policies involved in that, right, because you're still collecting personal information. But this presentation is really about the privacy policy in terms of what you would need to post on your website. The thing that I like about this question, though, right, is that you still have those same tenets, right? If you think about just why do state regulators, why do they care about protecting personal information, right? Is they're protecting, they're wanting to make sure there's certain guardrails in place to protect kind of that sensitive information. And so when you think about you want notice, you want consent, right? That still applies to whether you're in the website area, right? And you're looking at a website privacy policy to put with users going to your website, or if you are collecting information from your employees or your volunteers, those same tenets apply, right? Is you want to let your employees and your volunteers know what kind of information are you collecting from them and why. So as a volunteer, right, I'm collecting information from my volunteer, their email address, their emergency contact, right? So if they're on site and an accident happens, I'm going to collect their emergency contact information. And I'm going to use that, right, if there's an emergency and I need to get in touch with a relative or a friend. So it's all about, regardless of whether you're in kind of the website privacy policy realm, or you're in a employee handbook or volunteer handbook realm, you still have those same like underlying tenets, right? Of let's notify someone what type of information we need to collect from them and why, and then what we're going to do with that information. Excellent question.
All right, we've got another. What are the actual rates in which nonprofits are sued due to privacy policies? Is this data available or tracked anywhere?
That's a great question. So we know it from the for-profit side, right? I don't have the information necessarily. I don't personally on this webcast have that information, Rachel. Not sure if PDPA has that. If not,
not aware of any.
Okay, and we can do some digging and find out. And I love that you asked this question because we always try to take these things from a practical perspective, right? There's a part of it where it's okay, it's the law, right? Why do we need a privacy policy? Why do you need website terms of use? Because there are certain legal requirements and we need it to make sure that we're compliant. The practical part too is making sure that we're compliant, because all of that, right, is a headache for you. As a nonprofit, your primary job, right, the primary reason for you providing the nonprofit and services is so that you can run the nonprofit and provide services to those who need it, right? So what we try to do, right, is when we're helping out PDPA or other clients with these website terms of use and privacy policies, we're wanting to have the nonprofit be compliant, but we're trying to say, listen, we don't want you to have to deal with kind of the noise that's involved with any kind of lawsuit or legal dispute. So we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of personal information. We're putting in website terms of use and copyright policies to protect the nonprofit so that you all can do what you need to do, which is just run the day-to-day business, right? So I like that kind of practical approach of trying to say, yes, there's it's all legal, right? There's legal components of that. But we also are trying to get it right for you all so that you all can focus on what you really need to focus on, kind of running running your nonprofit, running the business and providing services out. So I think that's a great question.
Yeah, and Sarah, that's a good point. It's not just about lawsuits, but also about best practices, and particularly anyone who's collecting information on their website should have a privacy policy in place, just to kind of lay out all this out. Let's see, we've got another regarding copyright. Is it considered infringement if a website includes links to press articles in external websites, such as an online newspaper, using a screenshot of the article or a newscast video attached to the article? That's a good question too.
I'd say including a link to a website or an article is not infringement, because you are linking to the website itself. We often call that like a third-party link. The one thing to keep in mind when you're doing that, however, is you might want to include some language in your terms of use that say you're not responsible for any of the content that appears in that third-party link, because you don't want, for some reason, if that website ends up gets changed or ends up containing something that you don't want you kind of be associated with, you want to make sure that you're putting your visitors on notice that any kind of link that you're including is not to your content, it's to somebody else's content, and that other third party is responsible for their own content, not you.
That's a great point, Katie. Any concern with using a screenshot of the article instead?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. I would say that is maybe kind of walking a little bit of a line in terms of copyright infringement, but I think if you use a screenshot and then also use a link, that you should be okay there. But definitely if you're using the link, I'd say that that's pretty common and not an issue.
Great. All right. Y'all can ask any final questions, but I will just add that this is a lot of information. It's great information, but don't feel overwhelmed. A lot of you are clients of Pro Bono Partnership, so reach out to us if you need help with developing terms of use and privacy policies, or have questions about your websites. We have wonderful volunteers like Katie and Sarah that we can connect you to help develop something that's specific to your organization. We have just a few. Are there reference documents we can share? I'm not sure what they're referring to. Reference documents. Katie and Sarah, any thoughts?
I think templates for policies.
Yeah, I do have so we do have templates. We talked about, and this is a great question, because a lot of times you'll see they, like we talked about, right? The tenants are kind of the same, right? You want notice, you want consent. The website terms of use, it's a contract between you and the user. We have templates. The key thing with this, right, and is making sure that whatever you're agreeing to, right? So the website terms of use, the privacy policy, they are unique to your business. So templates are wonderful, and we use templates, right? When we start and we have a client coming through or PDPA, and we start with a template too, right? And then we have questions to you all to say, okay, are you, how are you using this information? Are you doing this? Does your website do X? Does your website do Y? So templates are great. We love them. We absolutely love them. And we certainly can provide them, but do need to let you all know that they're used as kind of the base and the jumping off point. And they need to be tailored, right, for what you as a nonprofit are doing, specifically with the information. And then also just unique to your industry, right? Because someone that's providing, like that's maybe in a healthcare realm and maybe has access to healthcare information or things like that is going to be different from a nonprofit that is working, doing animal rescue, right? So you've got different nonprofits that are doing different things, and it's not a one size fits all for the website terms of use and the privacy policy. But Rachel, we can absolutely provide some templates, and we can put kind of notes in for everyone, just things in brackets, so things to consider, so that individuals have kind of a starting point to start talking about and thinking through the issues.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I would echo Sarah that you really want somebody with this expertise working with you on these rather than just relying on a template. But thank you very much. All right, I think that's all the questions. So unless Randy has anything else from the education front, I think we are concluded. And I just want to take one more moment to thank Katie and Sarah for speaking to us today and sharing your knowledge. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone. If you've got additional questions, definitely contact Rachel and Randy, and they can help you out with a lawyer. We'd love to help you. Katie and I would love to help you, but they can connect you with someone that can help with respect to these, any questions you have, or helping even refresh your website terms and conditions or privacy policy. So we'd love to help you all, and just reach out to Rachel and Randy if y'all need help.
Thank you, guys.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.